This week on Let's Talk Cabling, we're going to be talking about PDUs. What are they and how you need to use them? Welcome to the show where we tackle the tough questions submitted by installers, estimators, project managers, IT personnel, and even customers. We are connecting at the human level so that we can connect the world. If you're watching this show on YouTube, would you mind hitting the subscribe button and the bell button to be notified when new content is being created? If you're listening to us on one of the audio podcast platforms like Google, Stitcher, Apple, would you mind leaving us a 5-star rating? Those couple little steps helps us take on the algorithm so we can educate, encourage, and enrich the lives of the people in the ICT industry. Thursday nights, 6 p.m., what are you doing? We do a live stream at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We get to ask your favorite RCDD questions about installation, estimation, project management, even career path. But I can hear you now, but Chuck, I'm driving my truck at 6, 7 p.m. I might get into an accident. I can't do that. Well, they're recorded and they're put on the website so you can consume them later. Also, while this show is free and it will always remain free, if you don't mind, consider being a supporter of the show. You can do it through Patreon. You can even click on the QR code right there where you can buy me a cup of coffee or even schedule a 15-minute one-on-one Zoom call with me after hours, of course. And always, we're looking for corporate sponsors too. If your company lines with educate, encourage, and enrich, and you don't mind being on an agnostic platform, send me an email. So one of the questions I get asked quite often is about PDUs. There seems to be a lot of confusion about them. So you know me, I know a lot of people in the industry. So I reached out to someone I knew and they recommended that I bring on JoeSkorjanec from Eaton. So Joe, give us the 50,000 foot view of who you are and who is Eaton.
So Eaton Corporation is a large company, but really, just to kind of boil it down, the company as a whole is focused on power management solutions. So that really spans everything from your utility provider right down to your IT equipment. So the piece, and I guess kind of where I fit in, what we're talking about today is powering IT equipment. So that's what's happening in the rack enclosure, where your equipment's directly plugging in. You're plugging your equipment directly in.
So let's start off with the simplest question of all, because I have people in my audience who are brand spanking new to veterans who have 3 or 4 decades of experience. What is a PDU?
So that's a super common question that we get, and I guess a couple ways to look at it. We always refer to it as the last link in the power chain. So what that means is it's where the IT equipment plugs in, kind of that last point. Really, a PDU, in a lot of ways, think of it as a power strip. But the reason we call it a PDU is because it does so much more than just a basic power strip. It will not only distribute power from one input to a bunch of devices, but there's also other metering capabilities, control capabilities, circuit protection. So a lot of other features that come along with it. So we call it rack power distribution, also to differentiate it from those familiar with the data center, the big PDUs that are upstream that maybe feed like a whole data center floor. This is at the rack level, so you'd install it, right where you plug your IT equipment in.
There's a lot of confusion between PDUs and UPSs. What's the difference?
So UPS, we love acronyms, right, in this business, and so the power business is no different. So UPS is an uninterruptible power supply, better known as a battery backup. So simply put, that just means if you lose power, there's a battery in there, and the UPS can make electricity from the battery to power your IT equipment. So that's kind of the core function of UPS, is providing battery backup. Also provides power conditioning. So maybe you're at a facility or in a location where the power quality is not great, voltage sags, high voltage, low voltage, or transient type power problems, and a UPS can help out with that. A UPS can also distribute power a little bit. Maybe you'll have, say you have like maybe 1 outlet or 8 outlets on the back of a UPS, but really where a PDU takes over is it can distribute power to more devices. So a lot of times a PDU is actually plugged into a UPS, and a PDU can power, say, 24 to 42 outlets or devices in an IT environment. So it's kind of like layered with a UPS a lot of times. Kind of providing two different functions is probably the best way to put it.
You stole my question. I was going to ask you, could you have a PDU and a UPS on the same thing? You kind of stole that question from me. You're thinking ahead, man. I like that. So you mentioned some things like voltage sag and I don't remember what the other one was. Can you just kind of tell us what are those and what could cause those?
Right. So I mean, if you think, maybe a good analogy is we've all been at home, right? Maybe you're eating dinner or something, and all of a sudden the lights, the lights in your dining room dim down a little bit, and that would be a voltage sag. So you have something happen to where the voltage goes low, and so maybe you have power, but you don't have good power. And IT equipment doesn't like bad power quality. It's not good for your equipment. It can cause outages to your IT equipment. So that would be like a voltage sag. Losing power, that's pretty obvious, right? You just lose your power and you have no power. High power or transients could be things from like an electrical storm, so maybe a lightning storm might put some power transients on the line, and those types of things can damage your IT equipment. So a UPS will kind of filter through all that and provide clean power to your equipment.
So those kinds of events are not something that you can control. You just got to really kind of plan for them. I would imagine. Tell me if I'm wrong. I'll make sure I'm going to try to apply the voltage sag. Right. I live in Florida.
Right.
It gets kind of hot here in August. Everybody's running their AC units, and all of a sudden the power company can't keep up with the 5 p.m. surge of people getting home and turning down their ACs. That would be an example of maybe one potential cause of a voltage sag.
You're exactly right. That's probably one of the most common causes that happens in Florida, happens in California, Arizona, can even happen up where I'm at, the upper Midwest, where it's really cold in the winter, but it can also get really, really hot in the summer. So you could have voltage sag. You could also have rolling blackouts, right, where they maybe kick power off to a certain area for a period of time. So the UPS is going to carry you through, so you don't lose that critical IT load.
So here's another question. This is kind of related, but it's not in our list of questions ahead of time. And I'm just curious if you might know this or not. If you don't, it's fine. Are areas that rely on alternate energy, like maybe windmills or solar, are they more susceptible or less susceptible to voltage surge? Do you know?
So areas that rely on alternate energy can have more power quality problems, especially when you're talking about things like solar or wind, which are obviously dependent on the sun or the wind. So if you don't have that, then what they have to do is they have to switch to alternate energy sources. That a lot of time that's like natural gas. Natural gas is pretty common because you can fire it up quickly. Coal or other kind of traditional fossil fuel type sources. So the answer is yes. I mean, you're going to have problems when you're relying on those kind of unreliable energy sources. And in fact, it's kind of interesting. Eaton's doing a lot of research and developing products in that area of how we can use our UPSs. Now I'm talking more like our big UPSs that might be a facility UPS, where we can store energy. So maybe you have a solar farm, you're generating some extra electricity. We could store that electricity when it's abundant, and then at night when the sun doesn't shine, we could use that energy. So kind of Eaton's looking at ways to where we become energy management more so than just a battery backup type solution. That's happening at more our facility side type products, but it's just ways that we kind of adapt to the energy transition, as we call it. So
right, but as a low voltage designer, right, or maybe a low voltage installer, if you're working in an area that has windmills or solar, I would say that would even push your decision even further towards a UPS with a PDU, or maybe even trying to talk to the customer, right? Would that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think in any IT application where what you're doing is critical, you're going to want a UPS. It's kind of, a lot of times people look at it as an insurance policy as much as anything. It's not something that happens every day, but all it takes is that one time when you lose something important, and it can impact your business adversely.
Gotcha. What are some good applications for PDUs?
So really a PDU, I mean, I guess any IT application. So anytime you have a rack of equipment, you have servers, network switches, anything like that in the rack, a PDU is really needed to distribute the power. Because generally what happens is you're going to have, when you go to install, you're going to have one or two outlets, and they're going to expect you to power a whole rack of equipment out of it. So so that's really where the PDU steps in. I guess another kind of capability or function of a PDU is it can do advanced things like metering. So so when you're plugging things in, you can make sure you don't overload that circuit. So every circuit, just like in your home, right? There's a certain amount of stuff you can plug in before you trip a circuit breaker. So what a PDU can do is it can have metering built in. So where there's a display on the front, it'll tell you how close you are to tripping that circuit breaker. So you can kind of make intelligent decisions about how much more you plug in. Another thing you can do, you can connect that to the network, so you can get that information through your your management software, and you can monitor on an ongoing basis. So if you have, like I talked before about maybe a voltage sag, or you have your current spikes up, you can actually get your software to give you alarms and tell you that there's a problem. So the idea is you get ahead of that before before something bad happens.
Yeah, I just bought well, actually I bought it before Christmas because of the chip shortage and the logistics issues. I just got it literally like 2 weeks ago. I bought a tripp-lite 24-port PoE switch. I'm gonna mount it in my rack behind me, and I'm gonna run my network in my little studio here. Are you telling me I probably need a PDU for that?
You probably need a UPS for that, especially where the PoE aspect of it. If you're powering anything off of it, if you if you lose power there, you're going to lose the middle of a podcast, right? You're going to lose power, and everything's going to go down. So if you had a UPS, you could ride through it, and you wouldn't lose your work.
So I imagine there's all different kinds of PDUs for different types of applications. What's a good selection process for maybe an installer or designer to kind of maybe like a checklist of, hey, my system's got this, so I need this kind of a PDU?
Right. So I mean, so the starting point is figuring out the plug type. So that would be based off of a couple things. First of all, if you've got a location where you have power circuits already run, you may have that plug type already identified. So that's the first thing you check, is what's available at the facility. If it's a new install and you're going to be running new circuits, then you look at how much power you're going to need in the rack. So you have to do a little math here, and you have to say, what am I going to be, what am I likely to install in the rack? How much power is that going to use? And so that would be how many watts, or at a higher level, how many kilowatts of power are you going to consume? And then from there, you could back into your, to your plug type. So kind of the first decision is always, how much power is the PDU going to have, which means what plug is it going to have on it. From there, you're going to move into technology. So I talked before that at a simple level, a PDU is going to distribute power. So what we call a basic PDU will just give you, say one 30 amp power input, for example, and you'll have a bunch of outlets, like say 42 outlets. So that's kind of like a basic PDU. But if you want to do more advanced things like do metering, or if you want to monitor that over a network, or even if you want to do outlet control, then you're going to look for those advanced technologies inside the PDU. And so this is really a matter of how you're going to use the PDU. But I will say, we've seen more and more people are moving towards network connected. COVID really accelerated that whole mindset of, you can't necessarily get to a site all the time, or maybe you don't have the resources to deploy to roll a truck to a site when something goes wrong. So having a PDU that can kind of remotely keep tabs or even control power is just a way to automate some of those things that maybe you physically did in the past. So that's where technology can really come into play.
Early on in the response to the question, you talked about doing some calculations and stuff, and well, that might be easy for a seasoned, designer or an RCDD. Might be a little bit more hard for maybe the lead foreman out in the field. Could somebody like that reach out to Eaton and say, look, here's what I got? Do you guys provide like a kind of service, say, okay, here's what you got, here's probably the best PDU for you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if somebody knows what they're plugging in, you might need to get a little information on the power supplies, pull some information from the equipment, or say, like people will come to us and say, we're deploying this specific Cisco switch, and we want to put 3 of them in and we want to put these blade servers in, they'll give us some part numbers and we'll say, okay, this is roughly what you're going to need from a power perspective. So we can definitely help with that. I mentioned before with the metering too, a lot of people, when they do an initial deployment, they'll use metering as a way to kind of get real world how much power they're consuming. So that's a way to plan for the future, right? So you don't overload it as you add equipment down the road.
Like any kind of network electronics. I think I read a stat somewhere, and I don't remember where I read it, but it said your typical network electronics like servers, routers, hubs, switches have about a 3 to 5 year lifespan. And it's not that they go bad. It's just there's something newer, faster, better coming out. Some people like to beat the leading edge. Is there a life cycle for PDUs?
We very much see a similar life cycle for the PDU. A lot of times what happens is when you hit that 3 to 5 year refresh, you're just taking it as an opportunity to replace everything. To your point, it's technology drives a lot of that, but also that the mindset is, if you're going to go to the trouble of bringing the whole rack down, you might as well put all new equipment in. So you restart the life cycle on everything. So from that standpoint, we see PDU refresh usually on the same cycle. That being said, I've gone places where I've seen PDU that are 10 or 15 years old, just simply because they just keep working. They're not, unless they're network connected at a basic level, it's going to keep operating. So technology is probably what drives it more so on PDU.
Yeah, technology is the biggest driver, but also on top of that, especially if you're in an area like I am, I'm in West Central Florida, about an hour north of Tampa, the lightning capital of the U.S., I might add.
Right.
I would expect a closer to a 3 to 5 year life cycle, but if you're out somewhere where you don't have huge, a lot of lightning strikes, so you get that ground potential rise, and if you get a company that they don't want to be the lead, they just want to be able to send their emails. They're not going to be adopting the latest technology. Then obviously I can see that PDU lasting for a long time. What is the longest that you've ever seen or heard of a PDU lasting?
We actually have PDU that are installed in some military systems. It's one kind of a segment of our business, and we've seen stuff that's 20 plus years old that's been put in service and just keeps operating. And occasionally we'll randomly get a request for, hey, I need to replace this model and it's been end of life for 15 years, and you scratch your head and say, gosh, you had a good run there, so it's time to refresh, right? So
yeah, exactly. Now, when you dispose of network electronics, there are some jurisdictions that have really strict disposal processes or places you got to take them because of the minerals and the stuff found inside it. Is that disposal process the same for a PDU, or is it a different process?
It's a similar process. You're going to push it to the same electronic recyclers that you would your IT equipment. Might be a little easier in some cases because they're going to pull the steel, aluminum, copper out of it, which is going to be the majority of it. And then the circuit boards, they just disassemble it. They just take it apart like they do any other IT equipment.
So I imagine you live and breathe, PDUs and power stuff, right? And you probably keep them plugged in with where your industry is going. What advances do you see coming down the pike?
Yeah, so we've seen really technologies move fast, I would say, over the last 10 years, but kind of the new frontiers we're seeing, cybersecurity is a really big thing right now in our industry. I'm sure you've probably seen in the news of, there's been stories about people hacking into like cameras, like webcams and other IoT devices that are kind of just hanging out there on the network, and they become targets, for exploit by hackers. And so PDUs and really any of the network hardware like that's non-IT but kind of utility hardware on the network has become a target in recent years. So I know that's something probably 5 years ago, Eaton really recognized that there was a trend in that direction, and we've really doubled down on cybersecurity, because you can imagine if somebody were to get control of a UPS or a PDU, they could turn something off potentially or power down a system. So cybersecurity is probably one of the hottest topics we have right now in the industry. But I would say on a more like the PDU itself, like the hardware of the PDU, something new that's kind of come about over the last couple of years is what we call universal inputs and combination outlets. And I'll explain that, break that down. There's kind of two separate things, but kind of the same concept. It's the idea of one PDU can have different power cords that you plug into it. So you could buy that one PDU, you get a cord that might, like I mentioned before, your facility might have different types of receptacles. So you could get, say, 2 or 3 different cords and you could deploy the same PDU by just attaching a different cord. So it kind of makes the PDU universal. And then on the back side of the PDU, there's what we call combo outlets, which is an industry term. And what that means is in the IT space, there's kind of 2 different types of main outlets that are used. They're called the C13 receptacle and the C19 receptacle. Some people just call them computer receptacles. It's that funny looking black receptacle. And there's a couple of different types. And so this new combo outlet combines those 2 types of receptacles into one. So where before you had to kind of know your outlet mixture, now you can get a PDU that has these combo outlets and it becomes more universal. So the idea is just to simplify what you have to order. And that's gotten really, really important, through all these COVID supply chain things that have happened the last couple of years. People are looking for more universal solutions. So that's been a big trend that we've seen happening.
So I just thought of another question as you were talking. It's funny, my brain never stops thinking, right? And I'm always going on about something. So we're using it for network electronics and stuff like that. But over the last, 7-10 years, there's been a push towards power over Ethernet, digital electricity, Bertec's One Reach program, where they can put, DC current along with a fiber cable for long distance and stuff. Well, that requires equipment at the head end and at the back end. So would a PDU be useful there as well?
It definitely would be. So all those DC technologies, even though when we think of a PDU, we usually think of AC, AC power. All those DC technologies, there is AC power somewhere further upstream. So, your utility power is coming in as AC power, and then like a power over Ethernet, for example. When you're powering all your, say you're powering your lights and your phones and your Wi-Fi hotspots and everything with power over Ethernet, well, you're going to want that battery backed up. So you're going to have a big UPS on the front end of that power over Ethernet switch, or a PDU on the front end of it that actually provides AC power to it. What we're seeing, really what the bottom line of this trend, what we're seeing, we do a lot of stuff with like new office buildings and other things where they're deploying a lot of endpoints, and the power demands have just gotten bigger and bigger in the network closet and in the data center. So along with that, we've scaled up the size, the power capacity of our PDUs and UPSs to match those trends.
So if someone want to get in contact with you or with Eaton, what's the best way they could do that?
So to get in contact with me, I'm on LinkedIn. That's a real easy way to reach out to me. With Eaton, Eaton has a very, very wide distribution and sales network across the country. So kind of in the datacom space, all your major datacom distributors sell Eaton products. That's a great starting point to kind of, if you're interested in checking out what we have to offer.
Very cool. Joe, I appreciate having you on the show, man. It's always good to have a fellow subject matter expert on to talk about stuff that I might be weaker in.
Well, I always tell, and I appreciate it. And I always tell people when I'm talking to cable and connectivity professionals that power is kind of like the other kind of connectivity that people don't always think about. But just like, data is important. If you don't have power, same kind of thing. So they're kind of like 2 twins, but different
mothers, right?
Yeah,
different fathers.
Mothers, exactly. Yeah, right. Right.
Very cool. So I hope you're able to learn some new things about UPSs and PDUs and when to use them and the design considerations and all that other stuff we talked about today. Remember, knowledge is power.
That's it for this episode of today's podcast. We hope you were able to learn something. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. Also, leave a rating so we can help even more people learn about telecommunications. Until next time, be safe.